As far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And during the few moments that we have left, we want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me. Us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Welcome back to another episode of The Malcolm Effect. As I said previously, when we were recording our episode regarding BLMUK, that was one of 3 episodes in which we aim to speak about BLMUK, what they're getting up to, the upcoming festival, which I remind people can be found in the episode description of the previous episode. But we're going to go straight into it, and we want to talk about BLM's initiative in which they're taking on the all too important task of political education. And we're going to go into kind of the weeds of it and unpack it further. Joining me today, we have 2 BLM organizers, UK organizers, and I want to go straight into it. One of you take the question. Why does BLM UK feel that political education is important?
So why BLM UK feels political education is important, there's a phrase that comes to mind where people say the facts speak for themselves. And actually, I don't think that's true. I think when we look at things, it's actually informed by not only our experiences, but also our ideas. Ideology frames how we perceive reality. And so when we think about people who we are inspired by, and one particularly British example is the Mangrove 9, which were a group of West Indian activists who frequented the Mangrove restaurant in West London in the 1970s. That restaurant was a place where the Caribbean community in London could socialize, get food from their culture, and just be with one another. That restaurant was constantly raided by the police, and it formed the home of what became the British Black Panthers. Now, those activists who decided to form that political movement, they got harassed by the police, as did many other people. But what shaped their ideas was the analysis of people like C.L.R. James, of other materialist Caribbean thinkers and scholars who saw that their experiences were shaped by a global context. And in that period, in the 70s, it was quite obvious to look at how the British Empire or European empires were still trying to claim control over the African continent. I think more clearly it would probably been the Portuguese, but also US hegemony was on the rise during that time as well. So even though these things were obvious to everyone, it took political analysis, political education for people to see what was at the root of their problems, what was the root of that police brutality, what was the root of the decolonial struggles. And so why we, inheriting from not only the Mangrove 9 and the British Black Panthers and the US Black Panthers, why we feel that political education is important is because without that analysis, without that understanding, our actions, our efforts to try and work out our own liberation can take us down a lot of dead ends, right? We can waste our energy by not having that accurate understanding of the world. And just as those who were fighting enslavement, whether in the plantations in the global south or in the Caribbean, or whether in the colonized lands across the African continent, for them to overcome, and they did overcome enslavement and colonization, for them to do that, they had to understand, they needed to learn the patterns, behavior, and mentality of their enslavers. And I think that is the task for us today. And us learning the ways of how we are chained, how we are still ensnared by white supremacy, that is what political education is, and that's the tool that allows us to continually learn, analyze, and adapt. So that is why it's so important to us.
Thank you so much. And how does BLM UK then envisage taking, or under what initiatives will BLM UK be engaged with in ministering political education?
So we're looking at developing a program that will help our members understand the situation we're in today. Right, we are shaping up about 7 modules that will give people grounding on how we see the world and how we seek to change it. There are many organizations, again, we've already referenced the Black Panthers, but like the Black Liberation Army also set up like a grounding of how to understand and work in the world. And so what we're trying to do is not just give people like lessons in what has happened historically. We're also trying to give people tools to work out our own liberation and understand better how the people who are oppressing us operate. Because just as the enslaved needed to learn the patterns, behavior, and mentality of the enslavers to defeat them, that's exactly what we need to do today, even though our situation is somewhat different. We continually need to learn, analyze, and adapt. And so, as to reiterate what I said before, political education is our tool to do that. And I think Mohammed can talk a little bit about the shape of the political education project that we're conducting.
Yeah, just before I bring Mohammed in, I think I really appreciate you laying that out, actually, because just like this podcast aims to do political education, I think something that has become abundantly clear through my experience in the encampments actually was the need and necessity for political education. Because so many of us, our subjectivity, our constitution is created through the environment in which we're in, right? So many of us are for better, not for better or worse, just for worse, the neoliberal subject, right? And I think I've seen it so much, more so because of my environment in the US. There's an inability to see the pernicious nature in which US imperialism operates. And I think that is only those mystifications of capital, those mystifications of race are only kind of pierced through having political education. So thank you. Right. Absolutely agree. But I'll bring in Mohammed. Talk to me. What's going on? What shape is this political education going to take? What can we expect? What does it look like?
Yeah, so for us, political education isn't a secondary kind of thing. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, to push back against some of those mystifications, to unlearn so that you can learn how to change the world. Because the point of knowledge isn't to interpret the world, as we all probably agree, it's to change it. And much more important than that then is also to help people find themselves situated within a Black radical tradition. I mean, because of exactly what you're talking about the fact that people see themselves and imagine the world and experience the world through kind of neoliberalism, which is hyper fixated on individualism and is also geared towards a kind of politics which sees any concession from the state, for example, through the prism of win. And sometimes even when you do win the concessions, it's easy to fall back or default to a kind of liberalism. And the kind of point that we're trying to do with this political education is to get people grounded in a materialist tradition and a tradition that's existed throughout the history of the Black liberation movement. I mean, the struggle for Black liberation has always been a contested struggle. There's always been different groups of people who claim the mantle of Black liberation. But we see ourselves as falling within the traditions, the more materialist traditions of Black liberation. And we want to instill that. And of course, we aim and we aspire to develop a political education program for the Black liberation movement here, which aims to instill a commitment to liberation completely. And so, we see ourselves, for example, in the traditions of people like W.E.B. Du Bois. We see ourselves in who believed, that the struggle uniting brown, red, and yellow and Black people, specifically workers, against Western imperialism, overcoming the global color line, but also seeing that the struggle here in the UK, which might be overcoming for many the local color bar, is intimately tied with that. And so it's intimately tied with the struggles against imperialism. That's kind of really, really important to us. And just as we of course, like hope to be heir to some of the Black radical tradition, whether here in the UK, in Africa, across the globe. We're also hopefully learning from some of the mistakes of our predecessors, and focusing especially on highlighting the voices of queer and abolitionist feminists within the movement, putting them front and center in the program that we're trying to develop. And that's why, we've developed our political education program. It's not just to kind of drop knowledge or drop books on people, but to always make sure that people have an emancipatory horizon, and to constantly to constantly protect themselves from the easy temptation of falling into a kind of, put it bluntly, like liberalism.
Exactly. And I think once again, what we're seeing is the necessity in this pushback against liberalism and reformism actually as well. And especially given we have an election coming up, and the rhetoric let's vote for the better of two evils, etc. And constantly we find ourselves caught in this cyclical death loop of voting for the better of two evils always. And I think I really appreciate your comments when we're speaking about situating ourselves in a tradition of materialist politics, right? Because as you quite rightly noted, Black liberation takes many forms, has many iterations and many instantiations. Many folks will claim a whole lot of things to be, and saying this is done in the service of Black people. But all too often, I think what we've seen, at least in the last 10 years in the West, a lot of times when you're not rooted in a materialist analysis, it's very easy to become co-opted. And we're trying to develop a politics, in my understanding of what I'm hearing you say, that isn't co-optable. So I do appreciate your comments. I know you guys are thinking about a program titled Timbuktu. So what can people expect from Timbuktu? What's the layout, format? Like, talk me through it.
So I'll talk a little bit about the shape of it, and I think Mohammed can go into some of the detail a bit more. But yeah, despite the Hotep name, what we are really harking back to is this center of knowledge, and really grounding people in what I think is our core like principles. There is a lot of things that we could say and that we could include in it, but we don't want to overload people with too much information. So our point of departure is talking about racial capitalism. We really want people to have an understanding of how the global economy works, right? And how that shapes the violence that we face. That's the initial point of departure. And to understand that the state, though we may demand concessions from it, is not our friend. It doesn't serve our interests, and is not ever going to be made to entirely serve our interests, right? It will always be in contestation with capital, and that capital always needs to divide and segment workers in a way that makes them pliable. And those divisions are essential to how capitalism works, whether it's on gender, on race as a primary method. But of course, class, all of these things intersect and aren't easily separated. But in terms of understanding the global perspective and imperialism, we believe it's really important to have racial capitalism as a key point of departure. I could go on, but I don't want to go into too much detail. Maybe there might be things you want us to pick up on, but yeah.
Yeah, talk to me. Please feel free to go into as much detail as you feel comfortable at this stage. But let's talk about like the layout, format. Where can people expect it? You're giving us a broad view of, yes, the kind of overarching theme is racial capitalism, the ways in which race and capital dissect, or the ways in which both of them produce each other, or one or the other. I'm an aspiring academic, so I can go on and on about the different ways in which we can talk about race and capitalism. But talking about the themes, and what do you? We've spoken a bit about, okay, we want people to leave analysis of how the world works around them, right? But let's tangibly, someone goes through this course, what can they expect?
Right. Okay, so what they can expect to be part of is 7 modules that would be delivered through like a reading group locally. Some of it would be done in online groups, but we very much want people to meet in person and to discuss these ideas together. Other than like an ideological underpinning. We also want people to be able to relate these ideas to their lives, to the movements or struggles that they are either interested in or active in. So, as Mohammed has already talked about, we're going to be talking a lot about queer and Black feminist and abolitionist ideas, but we're also wanting people to see why the anti-colonial struggles of the past are linked to the anti-imperialist struggles of today. And broadly, we're also wanting to get people in a perspective on how capitalism changes, how racism changes in its forms, whether it is the war on terror or how anti-Semitism has been both deployed and weaponized in various ways. So people going through this module, one of the key things we want them to do is develop relationships, actually, not just receive knowledge, but develop relationships, share stories, see the applicability of this analysis to their everyday lives. And some of the themes that we try to incorporate is literally the clothes you wear, your mobile phone, like the minerals that produce your phone, and the food you eat, and how we are complicit in racial capitalism, right? We're not just people who are at the sharp end of white supremacy, and that doesn't happen evenly, right? It doesn't happen evenly across borders. It doesn't happen evenly on a global scale or in the way how capitalism produces goods, right? So we receive, as I say, mobile phones and so on, and enjoy a social wage in the global north that people in the global south who may have similar skin tones to us do not enjoy. And so these are the sorts of things that we're wanting people to come away with, but also apply that to how you call for demands, how you develop campaigns locally. As I say, there's a broad amount of things that we're trying to achieve, but in our initial phase, we're wanting to give people first that ideological grounding, but more importantly, building that relationship with one another, because that's how people will decide, do they actually want to be members of our organization or not, right? And they will test out, is our criticisms of liberalism something that they agree with or not. So I hope that gives you a bit of a sense of what we're trying to do and what people will get out of it. But yeah, in terms of some of the module deep, I'm sure Mo can come in.
Okay,
Yeah,
Mohammed.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, I would just like, just to piggyback off of that, like completely 100%. That's those, I think Kojo really describes succinctly like what we're trying to do. And the most important thing then is to get people to understand from the very beginning that, first of all, we live under a system of racial capitalism. But this is also something that, so I represent it's part of this collaboration and developing Project Timbuktu. I represent the Decolonial Center, and we're all about trying to develop concepts and tools of like trying to understand colonialism today from the anti-colonial, decolonial perspectives. And this is something that's also runs through the Project Timbuktu, which is a very clear anti-colonial perspective, building off of the socialist traditions that came before us. And actually, Kojo, throughout as we were developing this module, has also been very insistent on making sure, and I actually really appreciate this, that the Black radical tradition also runs through. Because sometimes, you can tell a story of, this is racial capitalism, this is slavery, this is indentured servitude, this is what happens, this is how the state works with criminalizing Muslims and criminalizing Blackness and etc. But what we've also tried to be really sensitive to is that while we're taking people through this journey of, as a spatial journey in one sense of the fact that everything around them, the way in which they interface the world, is primarily linked to exploitation of somebody, and that we're all bound up in a web of exploitation, and that it's not about not shopping at sweatshops, it's not about this kind of stuff, but it's more about having a commitment to abolishing that web, and that web is what we call capitalism. And then but then also a historical story where it's not just a long arc of exploitation and racialization. And we're very clear to make sure that we talk about racialization instead of naturalizing or reifying race as if races exist. Racialization is a process which keeps people structurally subordinated. And so the main idea then is also a historical story as well. So a spatial story, but also a temporal story that goes back in time. But that at each juncture of this story, whether we're talking about enslavement, there were always slave rebellions. There were always maroon communities. When we're talking about wage labor in the colonies, hyper exploitation, there's always been strikes. Whether we're talking about gendered violence or queerphobic and transphobic violence, there's always been people resisting. And trying to draw that long arc by telling a materialist story and situating everyone who takes the course within that also gives people the morale to understand that we're all, just as much as we're trying to struggle against a long story of exploitation, we're also part of a long story of resistance, and that, we shouldn't be dissuaded from that. And that, so in general, then we have an anti-imperialist, very openly socialist understanding of racial justice within Project Timbuktu. We're also trying to imbue a sense of being a part of a radical tradition, and then also trying to guard ourselves from the temptation of looking for easy answers. And we're also trying to make sure that the course that we're developing is attuned to and sensitive to the needs of people living here in the here and now. And so it's not just about dropping knowledge from like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and saying, these are the theories, this is how you understand the world. But it's like your life right now, things that a lot of Black people are struggling with today, from school exclusions to killings in custody to a joint enterprise, trying to develop the skills and tools to be able to understand those through that radical tradition.
This is why I'm going to start fangirling when I hear Muhammad speak.
100%. I was like, yeah, man, this guy said everything I was supposed to say. They wouldn't get out of my mouth, man. It's amazing.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for that response. I think a struggle that so many people face, organizations, when they run political education, is how do we, and I say we here because I want to include myself in the project that you guys are involved with. I see myself as someone who believes in the same goals as BLMUK. How do we ensure, or how have you thought about the ways that BLMUK through Timbuktu will ensure the appeal to the masses?
Yeah, this is a tough one. We are not initially going to share all of these modules publicly, right? It's not all going to be available on our website. It's initially going to be an invite only, and it's something we're going to refine and improve upon as we go along. This is our first attempt at it. We don't assume or expect it to be perfect, right? But we do want it to be accessible. We don't want people to feel that they need to have at least a university degree to be able to contribute, to read and engage with the content that forms this module. So we are leveraging videos. We are also using podcasts and other ways of relaying these ideas so that it is accessible. As Mohammed said, people can link it to whether it is the exclusions or police violence, or even the discrimination that they face at work or just going about their daily lives in Britain. So the idea of making these ideas accessible, relatable, is something that I wouldn't say we've perfected. And I've been trying to say, I've been challenging the group who've been working on this also not to be too pessimistic. Our history is not just a history of defeats, or I wouldn't even say it is a history of defeats. It's a history of not only rebellions and resistance, but overcoming. The people who initially envisaged Africans being enslaved en masse never expected Africans to have independent states, right? With all the problems and criticisms that we can legitimately have about African states, and the situation in Kenya is a clear example, right? And its complicity also with what's going on in Haiti. But even though we can be quite pessimistic and say, look, the extraction, the capitalist extraction has not been interrupted. That's not entirely true. We've forced capitalism to adapt, and the white supremacists who have always led or pioneered capitalism, we've forced concessions, we've forced changes. And that system is dynamic. It means we can't ever rest on our laurels, but we can take heart that what our ancestors have started off, they've put us in a better position to complete the work and the struggle that they started. So those are the things that we're doing to make it more relatable. I hope that gets to
Yeah,
some
absolutely. No, and I fully recognize the difficult task in making things accessible to people on a mass scale, because it's not, some of the material can be quite dense, and life is complicated, and the systems in which we exist around us have adapted and have become durable because of their ability to adapt, and naturally, so following those tracks and changes is quite a difficult feat. So yeah, I think anything that contributes to helping people understand that will always be a net positive in pushing us towards liberation. Let's talk a bit about, so Mohammed, you situated yourself and Timbuktu within the Black radical tradition. Within the Black radical tradition, we are all aware of the different debates, even amongst materialists, or even amongst those who would say, let's say, have a Marxist or anti-capitalist lens. There are those debates and those disagreements. How do you, and anyone can take the question, how do you expect to contend with these differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the most important thing is it links directly to the last question that you were asking about building a mass. I mean, that's the aspiration that every, Black radical organization wants to do, which is to, to build a mass base. And what that means is that I don't like the phrase meeting people where they're at, because that assumes that you're at the right place. I think the approach should be is that we should be trying to draw the general strokes that we know within the, really radical, Black radical tradition, which, it's a tradition that we benefit from hundreds and hundreds of years, that appeal to people and that speak to people's everyday lives, and things that we try to, those aspects of it which very few people would disagree with. Things like when it relates to exploitation, things related to abjection, things related to the ways in which the state deploys violence, all of those kinds of things. I guess what we're really trying to do is not get too bogged down into dogmatic debates among ourselves and among the people who join the program, because what we're really, really trying to do is also not give the opportunity to our enemies, whether they're the far right, whether they're, the state, whether they're, members of the venerable press. I mean, we're really trying to do our best to build off of those traditions, and thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think a lot of the people who depart from the Black radical tradition, which has existed for hundreds of years, they have to make the case. Whereas for us, we build off of the people who came before us. We're in constant conversation with the elders and we're also really trying to develop from those themes and those concepts ways of understanding our world. And we have a commitment to understanding the material world as it is. And so we hope that the correctness, if you want to put it in that way, of our positions will be based on the strength of our analysis, rather than us getting too bound up in those kinds of divisive issues, because we've also learned historically the ways in which divisions within the Black liberation movement have become aggravated by the state. But that doesn't necessarily mean then you just say a unity based on let's just make a cocktail of all of the different ideas and ideologies that are out there, and then that's how we all unite. No, we can still remain principled and hold firm to our principles and not fall into the trap of those kinds of debates, which have also historically riddled the movement. But yeah, I'll pass it on to Kojo. Maybe Kojo has a better answer than I do.
Oh, no, not at all. But I just wanted to pick up on that. The reference to like a banal unity, people having an unprincipled approach to unity, like, we're all Black, therefore we support each other, which is a liberalism or a sort of a very crude collectivist or essentialist idea, right? I think in terms of what we are trying to develop is a discipline where we are working out what our principles are, and we're stating out clearly the things that we believe are important, and we're inviting people to engage with us. And we're not going to claim that we have the gospel, right? We're not going to claim that we have the truth and it should be unquestioned. We want people to test it scientifically, right? We want people to show or see if this is applicable to their life, and we also want to stand on the shoulders of those who have achieved so much and who we benefit from. But I don't have much more to add. I think you spoke beautifully on answering that question.
No. I think both answers feed well into each other. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. No, truly, honestly, this sounds amazing. Super excited. I think it's long overdue for the UK to see a robust political education program that speaks to the material conditions of Black folks, particularly in the UK, and also giving us the tools, as you said, and the language to adequately describe our condition. So how do people sign up? Where do people get involved?
So the first place that we're going to be launching this is at our festival. So Friend's House, Saturday the 13th of July. People who are interested can register on our website, go.ukblm.org/FEST-TIX. So Fest Tix. That's where people can sign up. If people aren't able to come down and join us at the festival, we'll be launching the first module later this year, and we'll be asking people to sign up on an online form, and we'll be developing that process and allocating people to local groups and launch properly in 2025. So it's a little bit of a ramp up, but that's because though we've got our modules ready, we want to make sure that we've got the facilitators, the locations, because we want it to be happening across Britain, not just in the southeast. We want it to happen across Britain. So those are ways of people getting involved, and they can also always email us as well if they're interested, or follow us on social media.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll once again put the details of how to get tickets for the festival in the episode description. And this is exciting stuff. So I'm wishing nothing but success for these endeavors. And please be involved. If you're especially in the UK, please, it's something that I implore you to check out and get involved and spread to other people. So until next time, peace and blessings.